Welcome to the number one podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not in the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
Just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're gonna lose. Coming down the stretch, you're gonna lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here as we head into the second half of our Big Ten previews. Today is the number 9 Maryland Terrapins. After a miserable year with such high expectations, third-year coach Kevin Willard will look to rebound and quash any talk there might be about his job situation. Just a reminder that each year we do our Beat Rod prognostication, and so you can try and beat him in his predictions for the final standings of the Big Ten, 1 through 18. $100 gift certificate to Nudge Printing, our awesome sponsor, for the winner. If you want to join, it is free. Just email me at Eric, E-R-I-C, at tffinots.com. Make sure you have your name in there, obviously. And then as a tiebreaker, the team that, as many points as Michigan State scores against Michigan this year, and they do play twice. So let's talk about Maryland here. Last season, miserable season, abject failure. It was high expectations and just did not go the way anyone anticipated. Kevin Willard in the second season, they were really good. The first year was a surprise in his debut, and then last year, with in many ways very similar players, they just really got off to a bad start. They're 1-3 in the season, finished 16-17 overall, 7-13 in the league. They were really good defensively. They finished 14th in the country defensively, but really, really bad offensively. Number 155, with one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the country, and a bad turnover problem too. They offensive rebounded okay, which kept them sort of close, and as always, I don't know if it's Maryland pays off all the refs, but they draw fouls okay to keep them from being even worse than 155th. So Willard's going to be heading to the third year, and not that anyone, of course, in the third year is on the hot seat, but I think the first year raised the expectations a little bit, maybe too high, and last year was well below what you'd expect in Maryland, a really good basketball school. And so, for a school that kind of pushed out Turgeon, who was a relatively successful coach, to be replaced with a guy who's not being very successful right now. It's one of those weird situations as not someone who's on the ground in Maryland, but you got to imagine if this year goes like last year, there's going to be, not that he would be gone probably at the end of the year, but it'd be a very challenging year the following after that.
I think that's all correct. And, it's interesting. I was thinking about this as we were starting. So much of this coaching stuff, you can talk about the strength or the potential of the program, tradition, you find resources, all of those things, and all of that matters, of course. But so much of getting it right sometimes is no more or no less than timing.
Sure.
And I say this because, Maryland has long been perceived by people who know what they're talking about as a very good job.
Uh-huh.
And that's true for a number of reasons. They care about the sport. Basketball matters at Maryland, as is befitting their heritage as an ACC school. It also sits right in the middle of one of the best talent-producing areas in the country. City of Maryland, you've got access to players in D.C., players in Baltimore, players in Virginia. There's a lot of talent that comes through that area. And Maryland should be well-positioned always to do well with those players. So it's long been seen as a great job. But when they fired Mark Turgeon, I think there was something of a rude awakening for Maryland's fan base. At least it would have been if you were a believer in the idea that, oh, Maryland can go out and get a superstar coach. Kevin Willard had a good run at Seton Hall. Nice, solid, successful enough run. He was not a hot name. He was not a guy who really made you stand up and take notice, like, wow, that's really going to mean something for Maryland. If anything, I think if it was me, I would kind of be in the opposite position, say, wow, not that he's a terrible coach, but that's the best we could do. Maybe we're not as attractive as we thought. I don't think it's necessarily that. I think it's timing. By that, I mean, who's available, who's ready to move at the moment that you got an opening, And I think the timing for Maryland was not great. If they had waited another year and they were, another 2 years, I guess, and they were in this year's hiring cycle, for example, you had guys like Dusty May, Eric Musselman moves, John Calipari moves. I mean, we had a lot of guys moving, any of whom I could probably pretty easily name 5 guys who would be more compelling names. It might not necessarily be a better coach when push comes to shove, but would have been more exciting names at the very least. And might, in theory, have been interested in a job like Maryland. So it goes to show you, it can sometimes be no more complicated than that. Who happens to be available and ready to move when your number comes up, Yeah. But we're where we are. And so Maryland enters year 3 of the Kevin Willard era with some uncertainty. The first year, as you said, was surprisingly successful. He was taking over a team that had kind of limped to the end of Mark Turgeon's era. If you remember, Turgeon resigned actually early that last season, and Danny Manning coached them as an interim the rest of the way. And that was a long time coming. I mean, people had Mark Turgeon fired maybe 6 times prior when he actually resigned.
Predicting recessions.
Yeah, exactly. And he finally went. There were not huge expectations for Maryland in that first year, but Willard made them a tournament team. And they actually looked a lot like Turgeon's teams. As you said, draw a lot of fouls, good defensively. They played with physicality. It stands to reason because a lot of the guys were still Mark Turgeon's players, so it would make sense. But they had a lot of those key guys from that team coming back. Plus, they had an incoming recruiting class that most people, I think the consensus was the 3rd best in the conference behind Michigan State and Ohio State. So it was kind of a similar dynamic to MSU. Well, you had some success last year. You got most of your key guys back, and you've added some really good freshmen.
Right.
You should be even better. Well, they weren't. And you ID'd 100% the reason why. The offense was abysmal, just awful. They were a tournament caliber defensive team, and they were a Division II caliber offense. I'm exaggerating, but only slightly. And that was it. I mean, their defense was just good enough to make them competitive most of the time, but not good enough to overcome that offense often enough to win more than they did. So I do agree. Willard's not, unless something crazy goes on, I don't think he's on the firing line. But if he doesn't get them back to the tournament this year, there will be heat going into year 4, because what you're starting to see is that Maryland basketball, which has long been, as I said, that school cares about the sport. Traditionally, they've had great fan support. The building's full. It's a raucous crowd. It's a tough place to win, all of those things. That was not there for much of last season. And that's the thing that will get you fired. Fans don't often realize that sometimes is the biggest thing that gets you fired. When an athletic department can look and see that the crowd is half of what they think it should be, that speaks volumes. And that's kind of what was going on in College Park last year, in my observation. So I would say it's an important year for Willard just to get some footing back.
Yeah, and I feel like that place has not been normal since COVID. It never got back to where it was before.
Thinking the same thing.
Whether that's related or not, hard to say. But maybe some places are more affected by that. It could just be reflection of the sputtering end.
Maybe it was the guys that used to dress like Turgeon graduated. Remember those clowns?
Yeah, right.
And basically those guys graduated and it's never recovered.
Yeah. Well, I think, those are, we've talked about this plenty of times, that the student aspect of it, the sort of the craziness, the zaniness or whatever, and the sort of the weird traditions you have as a student body, dances or whatever, the things you do. They have it in Breslin, they have it at Purdue, you see it at Duke. I mean, all these places have it. And if you lose that, it's hard to kind of just manufacture it again, if it, for whatever reason, it goes away. And
well, I think it's a function of two things. One is that they've only been, at best, decently successful since COVID.
Yep.
Not great. They have not had a great team. Their last really good team was the COVID year when it got shut down, and they tied for the Big Ten title. That was their last good team. And I think the other thing is, again, that Willard came in. They finally get rid of Turgeon, who I'm sure a lot of their fan base had decided they were done with years before it finally ended. And if you're a Maryland fan, you're probably thinking, okay, now we're going to get a guy that's going to really bring some pizzazz back to this thing. That was the thing about Turgeon, too. Even for his occasional success, and he did have some, he was not the most charismatic guy. He's from Kansas, I believe. I know he played at Kansas. And his personality was very much what you expect for someone from that region of the country. Just kind of low-key, sort of taciturn, not going to really pump up a room. And I'm sure they figured, okay, now's our chance. They keep in mind, the guy who kind of created that program really in the modern era was Lefty Driesell. Lefty Driesell, for those who might be too young to remember, was all about personality. I mean, that was a guy who was a showman. And so they were used to that. Gary Williams wasn't a showman, but he also won big, so it didn't matter. Won their only national title, got them to a couple Final Fours. Mm-hmm. They could deal with that if they were winning big enough. Willard is kind of the worst of both worlds so far. He's not an engaging personality, and he hasn't won big yet.
Yeah.
So, the heat's on.
Yeah, I feel like Maryland and Rutgers just switched places last year, where you suddenly had a team that Maryland couldn't score but could play great defense. They seemed like a Rutgers team from a few years ago, where they just, it would be a tough game and it wouldn't be easy.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you could overwhelm them because they just couldn't score usually.
Yeah, in the end, they weren't going to score enough points to beat you. Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about departing players and Maryland Cleaning House, brought to you by the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. If you need your house cleaned, your windows, your windowsills, maybe the inside of the windows, the outside of the windows, you no longer can see your yard or see the squirrels. If you need to have those problems, and again, not just necessarily your house, might be your business, commercial properties, residentials, whatever it takes. Squeegee Squad Grand Rapids, they can do it all. They'll come in there, they power wash, they'll wash the windows. Again, whatever you need done, 15% off. You mentioned Final Four. When you get your estimate, you can find a way to contact them in a very large Grand Rapids area, so generous Grand Rapids area. So give them a call. Give Troy and his team a call. You can find the way to contact them at our support page at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/support. And so players getting cleaned out of the Maryland program, will begin with the most important one who transferred in the year before and really sent Maryland to that surprising finish. And then last year, it just didn't seem to work as well. Jameer Young, point guard, kind of did everything, averaged 20.4 points a game, 40, 32, 90 shooting, and averaging a lot of free throws, almost 7 a game. He also almost corralled 5 rebounds a game as well as 4.2 assists. However, as we've just the year before, although he has 4.2 assists, he also had a lot of turnovers. He averaged almost 3 a game. And so he was not the most efficient point guard. And I never even thought he was like very streaky. He was just a guy who just kind of shot his average and just was never quite good enough shooting outside for you to be really, really worried about him.
Well, I don't know that I go that far because you don't luck your way into 20 points a night.
Well, yeah.
And the thing is, you also have to remember that the free throw thing is a big deal. When you average 7 attempts a game as a guard, that's a massive number. And you shoot 90% when you get there. That's what really made him a high-level player. Because I agree, the shooting from the floor was not great. It's a tough thing because you look at his production, not just the scoring, but 5 rebounds a game, 1 to 4 assists per game.
Oh, yeah.
Also a good defensive player, very good. He contributed in every area. So it's a big, big loss from that perspective. On the other hand, you could argue, well, you might not get as much production, but you might be able to get more efficient play at that position. Fewer mistakes, better jump shooting. That's what they have to hope for, but this is a big loss. There's no way around it. He did so much for them.
Yeah, what is the term used for somebody who just has the ball in their hands all the time? And is it a high utilization player or something like that?
Ball dominant, high utilization.
Ball dominant, yeah. I mean, that's the player he was, and so that it limited opportunities for his teammates who I think could contribute. And I guess my only point is 32% 3-point shooting. I never felt like he would go 45% one game and then 20. He just seemed like he was always about 32%.
Yeah,
hit about a third.
I agree.
So next player that we always liked as well, but just never seemed to quite get to that level that we thought was possible, is Dante Scott, 6'7" forward, averaged 11.2 points a game, 4.7 rebounds a game. He shot 43% from 3, and that's what he did lowish volume.
That's what he did as a sophomore.
As a sophomore, right, and just never quite got back to there.
No,
and never seemed to really demand the ball as much. And I didn't know if that was a reflection of just Jameer Young or if it was him, because I felt like many times he could take over a game and just be a tough cover, and he didn't do it enough.
As a sophomore, he did. He was a guy who, as a freshman on that 19-20 team, that Big Ten title team, kind of came in as a less heralded guy in a very good recruiting class and ended up starting. Showed a lot of potential. Then as a sophomore, the COVID year, 2021, he was really good. And that was the year he was a 43% shooter from 3. They ran a lot of offense through him at the high post, and he made things happen. I thought he was dynamite. And he never got back to that level. Never got back to that level as a shooter. As you say, they didn't utilize him as a playmaker nearly as much. Look, it wasn't a bad year, 11.2 points, 4.7 rebounds. That's solid. But I was always left with the feeling that there was more in there that they never quite found a way to tap into again, the way they did that sophomore year.
And then we have the Kaiser, Jamie Kaiser, 6'7" freshman forward. He transferred to Butler. So, he's with a bunch of transfers with the McCaffrey boys. He has only averaged 4.4 points a game, 2 rebounds a game in about 20 minutes. Did not shoot really as well as sort of advertised. He shot 27, 27, and 78.
Not a great year shooting the ball. And again, I mentioned that freshman class that was highly regarded. He was one of the reasons why he was considered a consensus top 100 guy. They thought he was someone who could step in and if not start, then at least give them solid reserve minutes. The shot never came around. Didn't do the thing. He didn't make the transition as smoothly as I believe they thought was going to happen. And so then he elects to transfer to Butler to go play for Thad Matta. It's a loss. It's a lot, but it's a loss more from the perspective of what they imagine he still might be able to become rather than what he actually was last year, which are two different things. And it's much more of a speculative thing, right?
Right. But, we see plenty of players their freshman year, they don't shoot well, and then they just sort of figure it out after that. So, but you don't know which end of which one you're going to get.
That's why I say it's speculative, but with reason to think that might, he may be a player at Butler sooner or later.
Then we have Madi Traore, 6'11" transfer from New Mexico State. Didn't really do much last year, and he's actually going all the way down to JUCO.
Yeah, and obviously we can assume by virtue of that move, looking to reset. And probably then transfer back up if he can be productive at the JUCO level. But it didn't work out.
Yeah. I mean, he's 6'11", so that gives him a chance to make it.
Have
someone take a flyer on him next year, right?
You will always find somebody who's willing to give you a chance.
Yeah. Then we have Caleb Swanton Rogers, 6'11", big. He averaged 1.5 points a game, 1.7 rebounds a game, played 31 games, but did not play a whole lot. So he ended up transferring down a little bit to Old Dominion.
Yeah, that would be a sign that perhaps the feeling, not just at Maryland, but around the sport, was that his potential was not as great as they had assumed. Because you do see it, and as we go through these rosters, you'll see guys who weren't overly productive, players with size, let's say, who weren't overly productive, but they still get another high major opportunity when they hit the portal. When a guy doesn't get one, it is telling in that way.
Yeah. Jonathan Lamonte, he a 6'4" freshman guard, didn't really do much in the first year either, and he transferred to North Carolina A&T.
Same deal, transfer down. I think the suspicion would be, all right, we found out he isn't actually a guy who's likely to succeed at this level. Although, you do see this phenomenon sometimes, and you don't close the door on it, where a guy starts at a high major, transfers down, does well, and then transfers back up to another high major. That happens. And you could say that some of these guys may be making a bet similar to what we just talked about with Traore. They're looking to go down in a bid to build their resume back up.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. You transfer to a major team and you're getting 5, 6, 7 minutes a game. You're not going to ever have an opportunity to highlight yourself to get picked up by someone.
Yeah. And that's probably the mentality in at least some of these moves. But again, it does tell you what the college basketball world currently thinks about them as a player, at least.
Exactly. And finally, for departing players, Noah Batchelor, 6'7" forward. He played a couple years with the Terps, never really got going, and so he's going to be heading to Buffalo.
Yeah, he was a home state guy. He was a guy, I want to say he was a player that I can't recall whether Willard grabbed him after he got the job or whether he had signed or committed under Turgeon and Willard was able to hold on to him. But one way or the other, he was an in-state guy they thought might have a chance to help, and it just didn't work out the first 2 years. So he's transferred down to the MAC level, and we'll see how it goes for him at Buffalo.
All right, we'll talk about returning players then for Maryland. This is brought to you by Nudge Printing, who prints all our gift cards for our prizes for both our NCAA tournament contest and also the Beat Rod contest. So you want to check out Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com, run by some great Spartans. They are one of the unique places that actually has official MSU logos and vintage logos on all kinds of apparel. And I just got a huge trove of stuff from Nudge Printing for my daughter, who's attending Michigan State this fall, so she has some green to wear. She's very appreciative of that. Super comfortable stuff. They're the most popular clothes we get in our family, so you can't go wrong with Nudge Printing. And the great thing is you get 20% off if you type in Final Four, just as one word, into the checkout with your order. And again, high quality stuff, screen printed, and huge selection. And not only Michigan State stuff. So if you got a divided family, you got someone from maybe Eastern Michigan, they can get their stuff there too. So check it out, nudgeprinting.com. All right, so we'll begin with the player who's most important to come back for Maryland at this point is Julian Reese, 6'10" senior. He finally sort of figured things out as a big man, and you mention this all the time where it just takes a while sometimes for the big men to kind of get it figured out. He averaged 13.7 points a game, almost 10 rebounds a game, a little under 2 blocks a game, shot 55% from the floor, poor 57% from the line. And so that's the thing, you could sort of shack him there or like hack a shack or hack a Julian and get away with him.
A lot of good production. This isn't a surprise. Even as a freshman, he struggled with consistency at times, but you could see the talent.
Yeah.
And so it's not a surprise that he evolved into what he is now, which is one of the better big men in the league. Look, the counting numbers are great. Almost a double-double, and then almost 2 blocks on top of that. But 2 major issues stand in the way between him being a good player and maybe a first-team all-league player. And they're they're common ones at his position, and they can be tough to overcome. So it's no given that he gets through it. Considering how often he gets to the line, he's got to be better than 57%. He needs to get, I would say he needs to get up in the mid to high 60s to really feel like they're getting something close to the most out of what he could give them due to his ability to draw contact. The other thing is he's had a perpetual problem since he's been at Maryland in avoiding foul trouble. He takes a lot of risks, a lot of unnecessary chances. He's out of position, going for what I would call trying to make the 10% or the 5% play.
Right.
Where you just, it's so clear. And that can be going for a blocked shot. That could be trying to contest a rebound that's out of your area and you're not in good position to be able to get it without picking up a foul. All of those types of things. And that's a judgment thing. And some guys do finally adjust. They learn enough to avoid it. We haven't seen that yet from Reese, and he's running out of time. This is his last year. I think the other thing, the third thing that I would watch for with him is, and we'll get into the why on this in a minute, but given the way Maryland's assembled this roster, it looks to me like there's a reasonably good chance Reese is going to end up playing a lot of 4. And there are a few teams in the conference this year that seem to be spoiling to do this, where it's kind of a Twin Towers look.
Mm-hmm.
And Michigan State actually being one of them with Xavier Booker. I think Book is a little better fit than some of these other teams. Maryland, for example, Reese is not a stretch threat on offense at all, at least to this point in his career. And I don't think it's likely we'll see, that's the difference between him and other guys they've had like Stick Smith, for example, similar size, but could actually really shoot. There's no reason to believe Julian Reese is suddenly going to be raining threes. So, and then I wonder about how that's going to play out defensively. And again, with the foul trouble, if he's got to guard 6'6" guys that can go past him, is he going to be able to hold off and avoid picking up needless fouls? So that's a challenge for Kevin Willard to sort out, but very good player. If he makes the kind of improvements that we've talked about him needing to make, you could see an all-conference type season for him, no doubt, but I don't think that's a given. There are real questions here too.
Yeah, I feel like the block shot is super common for a lot of these players to pick up a lot of fouls. They almost allow themselves to be out of position, or because you gamble so much getting those block shots. And I mean, I feel like that was Marty's biggest problem when he would come in those games back when he was like a sophomore. He's always trying to block the shot, and
it's two things primarily. It's that, and as I mentioned, the other thing is, and Reese is a good rebounder, and when you are a good rebounder, sometimes that can be a negative. As strange as that
they're
might
all
sound.
yours.
You assume every ball is yours, and sometimes, trot out the old cliche: discretion is the better form of valor.
Yeah,
it's true. And I can think of a Michigan State player, fairly recent vintage, who used to have a big problem in this area, Gavin Schilling. Gavin Schilling used to pick up so many fouls on plays where he had about a 10% chance of getting the rebound. And I feel like Reese does some of that too.
So next returning player, Deshaun Harris-Smith. He was a freshman last year, so this year, sophomore, 6'5", 215 pounds. He was a big recruit coming in. He had 7.3 points a game, 4.3 rebounds a game, shot 37, 20, and 58. So obviously shooting was a bit of a problem. He was expected to be, I think, a better shooter. I think he played pretty well when he came to East Lansing. I think that was one of his better games. That's sort of where he got, I don't know if he got inserted in the starting lineup, but he definitely got more minutes after that point. That was sort of his coming out party in some way.
He's a guy to watch because he was very highly regarded. He was a top-rated recruit, and he played a ton, started a lot last year, but the offensive end was challenging. Defensively, he was just fine. So they can count on him there. But when you shoot 20% from three on the wing, that's a problem. That's going to limit your team, right? Because that's a position. It's just like in baseball. It was talk about, first base is a power position. You feel like the way you typically construct a lineup, you need home run production from the guy playing first base. This is the problem the Tigers have had this year with Spencer Torkelson, right? In basketball, your perimeter guys, but particularly your wings, need to be at least decently productive from three. If they're not, it's going to be likely to create problems for you, unless somehow you're fortunate enough that you've got a 5 or a 4 or both who make up for it. Then maybe it works, but Maryland didn't have that. So I would say that Harris Smith is a guy you need to keep your eye on. He certainly has the potential to have a breakout sophomore year. This is frequently the case. You mentioned it when we were talking about Jamie Kaiser.
Yeah.
Guys come in, struggle as freshmen because they're trying to adjust to the level. They're trying to adjust to better scouting, scouting reports, period. You know, you don't often have great ones at the high school level. So scouting reports, physically more capable defenders. And what that often equates to is your shot window is smaller. So you've got to adjust to that as a shooter. Oh, I don't have as much time or as much space as I'm used to having to get my shot off. That can affect things. And it can take, frequently this happens, it can take guys a little while. Harris Smith, physically, he's well put together. I think he certainly is a guy that's capable of scoring inside the arc. It's a question as to how quickly the jumper comes around to at least be respectable.
And then a player who all Indiana Hoosier fans would agree is allergic to the three-point line, Jordan Geronimo, 6'6". He's a COVID player, transferred last year from Indiana. He averaged 5.4 points a game and 3.9 rebounds a game, started 26 times. He shot 43, 17, and 66. And real athletic, but boy, cannot shoot.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. When he got to Indiana, I had visions that maybe they'd found another Victor Oladipo or OG Anunoby type, because physically he was similar, well put together, decent size, explosive athletically. And like those guys, it took a minute for their perimeter games to come around. Well, it's never come around for Geronimo. But that's okay. Even though he can't shoot, he can play a productive role for this team if they're not asking him to do too much, because he's a veteran, so he understands how to play. He's good defensively, and his athletic horsepower allows him to occasionally make plays for you. You just can't ask him to be a 25-minute-a-night guy because the offense would bog down.
Then we have Jahari Long, 6'4", fifth-year player as well. He's known as a defender. He averaged 4.7 points a game on 42, 36, and 77.
Yeah, and though he was known as a defender, it was important that he was one of the few decently effective shooters, at least in an efficiency sense.
Right.
Maryland. He didn't take a lot of them. And he's a guy who followed Willard over from Seton Hall, and he's been a key element in their rotation, usually as a reserve. And I would expect that's probably where he slots in again this year, but nice piece to have.
Then Chance Stevens, 6'3" guard, transferred in last year from Loyola Marymount, but didn't play a couple years ago when he was at Loyola. He shot 37% from three, so I guess can't get any worse shooting, so they'll probably hope for more from him.
Look, on a team that struggled as mightily as they did shooting the ball, anybody who's been able to hit shots, you would think in theory has a chance. No pun intended.
Yeah.
So I would say that Stevens has an opportunity to maybe earn a role if that shooting can translate.
And finally, for returning players, we have Braden Pierce, 7-footer, 230-pounder. He was redshirted last year.
Yeah, and look, 7 feet and 230 pounds speaks for itself, and they had some size to part as well. So I would say there's an opportunity for reserve minutes here, a very likely opportunity, as a matter of fact, that he can earn some time off the bench. Probably not a huge role, but I wouldn't be surprised to see him somewhere at least in the 5 to 8 minute a game range. That's probably about what's available.
Right. All right, we'll move on to newcomers. And at the end of this, we'll have Rod tell us who other teams will have to keep in the gutter as far as players. So if you need to make sure your gutters are working properly, both at your home or your business, there's no better people to take care of than the Brothers Who Just Do Gutters. It is September now, and it is fall. We're getting close to the point where you want to make sure those leaves that are in there get cleaned out. Maybe you just need the leaves cleaned out. You want to get in the ladder. You can call the boat that suggests you got us to do that. They'll also can put the leaf guards on, so you don't have to do it next year. They can also repair things or replace anything that needs fixing. No job is too big or too small. They will come out and do it. 10% off if you mention Final Four when you go get your estimate. You can find ways to do that at our support page, again, at tffionts.com/support. And there you can find the link for either the east side or the west side of the state. Wherever you live, the brothers have got you covered. So we'll begin with the highly acclaimed Derek Queen, top 20 guy. He's 6'10", 245 pounds freshman center, who you're alluding to before, why Julian Reese will have to play the 4. So you expect him to come in and play there and make an immediate impact.
This is a tough one. It was kind of a surprise that Maryland got Queen because there had been smoke around a number of other programs during his recruitment, and then it kind of settled into, I believe, if I remember correctly, I believe he committed in the spring. So it went on for a while too. But this is an elite recruit, national top 20 guy. Everybody loved him. He comes in, and as a freshman, the expectation is he will give them effective play in the post on offense. Got great hands, good size and strength, so he can create space, and he tends to finish plays around the rim at a high level. All that sounds great, right? But
Yep.
it comes with some questions. One is that he's not any kind of stretch presence. So as I say, if they're trying to roll their best 5 out there, it includes both Queen and Reese. I don't think there's any doubt about that. The problem is both of those guys need to be around the basket in order to be effective. So how does that work in terms of the modern game? Is there enough space? Is there enough opportunity in terms of post scoring for both of those guys to get the opportunities that they would like to have? And then it also has an effect potentially on your offense as a whole on spacing. If you've got 2 big guys occupying all that room inside and you don't have proven shooters around them. The other thing is on the defensive end. Maryland, as we said, was a very, very good defensive team last year. And I like Reese as a defender.
Right.
For the most part. He's mobile enough. Queen is not mobile. And the concerns are that he won't be able to play anything but drop coverage. So that might cause Maryland to be exposed a little more than they were used to last year when they had Reese and Dante Scott.
Yeah.
And they could really switch and stay connected to the perimeter. Maryland's defense might have more holes than they had a year ago if they're playing Queen major minutes. But look, bottom line is there's no way he isn't playing a huge role. He adds too much to not do that. So it'll be interesting to see the fit.
And you imagine that was part of the deal, him coming, right? He's not going to come. This is probably a player that plays just 2 years or something like that. I imagine that's his thought, right? And you want to be playing right away. And so you probably have to talk to Reese and make sure it's going to work out with him and just go ahead and try for it.
Well, I think the sales job was probably not difficult because my guess is Julian Reese is like a lot of other guys in the modern era who are 6'10", when they say, hey, we want to play you with the 4, he's like, can't wait. Fantastic. Right. Because he probably thinks he can do it.
Right.
My question is, can he actually do it? Is that the best utilization of Julian Reese's game? I think that's an open question. But I'll bet he's enthusiastic about it. I'd be surprised if he's not.
Yeah, right. We'll go on to Jacoby Gillespie, a 6-foot junior point guard transferred in from Belmont. Averaged 17.2 points a game and 4.2 assists per game, along with 2.5 turnovers a game. He shot 56, 39, and 83. So that may be a little of the scoring and the shooting that they've been looking for.
Well, I think finally, after, it seems like it's been about 40 years, but maybe it's only been about 10 or 11. Our Big Ten nightmare of trying to keep Maryland point guards off the free throw line may be over.
Oh.
Watch Gillespie come out, totally change his game and get 7 free throws. But his track record at Belmont does not suggest he will play that way. And this has been a constant now. If you go back, you had Mello Trimble for all those years, then Anthony Cowan, who did the same thing, And then we just had Jameer Young for a couple of years. So we've had a long run of Maryland point guards who played that way, and I think it may be over. Gillespie will be interesting because he's a very different kind of player all the way around. 39% from three, 56% overall from the floor is outstanding for a 6-foot point guard. So this is a guy who's clearly proven he can shoot. Decent playmaker, but again, that assist to turnover ratio isn't great. It's okay. It'll be interesting to see how the adjustment happens. I don't think there's any question he is the starting point guard from day one. I honestly don't think there's another credible contender for that role. But his shooting is the big deal. We just talked about if Maryland's going to be intent on playing that Twin Towers lineup, the other three guys on the floor have to be capable of hitting jumpers. They have to be for the offense to work. Because otherwise, teams are just going to pack it in on the big men, and it's going to make their life difficult. And if Maryland's guards can't make opponents pay for that, the offense is going to stagnate yet again. So Gillespie, a very important addition. And again, the question that comes in here in a general sense, as it always does, with a mid-major guy coming up, is how does this game translate to the Big Ten level? You never know for sure.
Yeah, I feel like when we see guys from Belmont, they don't generally struggle too much. That's a pretty...
No, it's a good program. Yeah.
And your point about having good shooting is that makes you wonder how much of a role Geronimo's out there. I mean, yes, he's athletic and he's good defensively, but can you have just a hole out there in the wing? Is it that's always the trade-off you got to make, right?
Here's where I think it could help. I could see Geronimo getting some backup 4 minutes.
Oh,
so
sure.
When they decide to rest Queen, maybe Reese slides to the 5 and Geronimo comes in and plays a small ball 4. You're not solving your stretch problems that way, but he can at least give you physicality and athleticism at that position.
Okay, next would be Selton Miguel, a 6'4" transfer from South Florida. He started out at Kansas State. He averaged 14.7 points a game on 41, 39, and 80 shooting. So again, and that's also pretty good volume for 3-point shooting. So again, bring in shooters, which they seriously lacked last year.
In theory, this is exactly the kind of addition they needed to make. So he's had some high major experience by starting out at Kansas State. Went to South Florida, had a really good year, almost 15 a game, 41, 39, 80. That 39, important because it came on high volume. But I think the question mark here, there's a lot of buts with this team. This one is last year was by far the best he shot over the 4 previous years of in his career. So when you see that, it's one of two things. Either, well, he's finally figured it out, or he got hot for 5 months and there's likely to be a regression. You don't know which it is yet until we see the season unfold. So I could see why Maryland looked to add him. Makes sense. But he's got to be pretty close to the guy he was last year for it to matter.
Right. And I'm sure, you look at that and you're like, well, he didn't shoot as well, but he's at a bigger conference in the Big 12 with Kansas State. Was that a reflection of him being sort of young and now he's figured it out to get South Florida? Or is it because the competition's not as much in South Florida? He's able to get more. Yeah, you'll find, obviously, like anything, you'll find out this year.
Yep.
Moving on to Rodney Rice, 6'4" transfer from Virginia Tech. He averaged 7.4 points a game as a freshman last season. He shot 32, 33, and 83, where most of his shooting was actually behind the line.
Yeah, and in this case, you're hoping that a guy who's only played 1 year just continues to progress.
Right.
And maybe he actually is able to help that perimeter shooting as well. I think Rice is likely to play a rotation role. And if he can keep improving the deep shot, then he could be very important.
Then we have Tafare Gapare, 6'9" transfer from Georgia Tech. He's 2 years left of eligibility. He averaged 5.1 points a game, 3.5 rebounds a game in about 18 minutes. Also had about a block a game. He shot 35, 17, and 68.
Yeah, the shooting numbers do not give you a great feeling, but decent rebounding and that shot blocking element and a 6'9", he brings some length. I don't think they're asking for a lot out of Gapare. It's basically can he come in if we need him to fill a role at the 4 or the 5 and just give us some spot minutes?
Yeah.
And I think that's about as much as they'll ask for. I would say there's a chance that he and the redshirt freshman Braden Pierce are kind of fighting for that marginal rotation role. Because I do think Geronimo can and will play a decent amount of backup for.
Then we have Malachi Palmer, 6'5", freshman wing. He was just a little bit outside the top 100. And so whether he sees the court much or get red shirts, I guess we'll find out.
I would bet on a year of development. When your issue is shooting coming out of high school, on this team, I think it's unlikely.
And finally, for newcomers, Jalen Young, 6'2", transfer from Memphis, where he averaged 2.2 points a game in 11 minutes.
Yeah, I don't see it likely that Young plays a significant role either. The one thing I would say, and he wasn't really, at least didn't demonstrate much in the way of point guard game at Memphis, but the one thing I do see potentially available is they don't have another obvious backup for Gillespie at the point. All the rest of these guys are truly wings. I think if it's not Young, maybe somebody like Jahari Long will get those minutes. It's not really his game, but they're going to have somebody. Even if Gillespie plays heavy minutes, you'd still figure he probably needs at least 6 or 7 minutes a night of caddy help, and so somebody's got to step up. That might be available for Young, but we'll see.
Who of all these players who are on Maryland's rush would you say is the player to keep in the gutter for other opposing teams?
I got to go with Reese. I mean, he's easily the leading scorer. I think he's shown a gradual progression in his game year to year. Now, he's got challenges, as we've talked about. Some have been perpetual in his college career, and then there's a position issue. Right now, you wonder what does it do to his game, his production, if he is in fact playing a lot at the 4. But he's got to be the choice at this point.
Yeah. All right. So overall, Maryland, after a disappointing season, has to bounce back. Certainly with the post-scoring improvement, with the recruit coming in, despite losing Jameer Young, looks like you're going to get a transfer with Gillespie, who may be able to sort of fill in and replace his scoring. You have him here as 9th, which puts him clearly inside the tournament discussion in a probable tournament team.
Probably.
Yeah. So, what do you think for the year?
I think they're like a lot of these other teams that we've been talking about. I think there's real potential here for sure, but there are also a bunch of questions, and we don't have any clue yet as to which way is more likely for those questions to be resolved. And that's going to be what tells the story. I think this, if I had to pinpoint one guy who was the key to Maryland's season, I'd probably say it's Harris Smith as a sophomore. Does his game continue to improve? Does he elevate as a second-year guy and actually become an impact player the way that he was expected to when he was recruited? If he does, that could be enough to change the dynamic for Maryland's entire team. Because right now, when I look at what I would guess is the likely starting 5, you've got Gillespie and Miguel coming in, both of whom were good shooters last year. Well, that's only 2 guys. If Harris Smith struggles again from 3, that means your starting lineup only has 40% of the number of players on the floor for you who you would trust shooting a jumper. That's a very, very difficult equation to try to win with.
Yeah.
In the current evolution of the sport, And so to me, I don't think Harris Smith needs to become a 40% guy, but he's got to at least be somewhere in the 30s. He's got to be a credible threat from 3. And then elevate the rest of his game too. Be more confident inside the arc, finishing more opportunities, getting more involved. Those are the things that I think will be key in elevating Maryland as a team, because I don't expect, as I said, I don't expect Reese to suddenly develop much of a face-up game. And Queen is definitely not that kind of player either. So, and yet, if you're Willard, you got to play both of those guys a ton. You got to play them together a ton. You have to. So, if it doesn't work, there are going to be serious questions as to Kevin Willard in terms of his roster building, because the potential downsides are obvious. But if it does work, then he'll be in a different position, and so will the program. I've got them in a spot where I think they can be a tournament team. There's a lot of talent here, but it's got to come together in close enough to the right way in order to make that happen.
Yeah, you expect that their offense will be better, but can the defense be as good as it was last year? Because if the defense slips now,
that's an open question.
Suddenly, right, you're kind of right back where you started. I mean, how much of the defensive efficiency was related to Dante Scott and Young? If it was just as much Reese and Geronimo, and then you add some pieces that are adequate too, then you're okay. But that's, you may make it a little better and then worse in another area, and you're in the same spot.
I think you make a very good point. I think Young and Scott were both very good defenders, and in particular, the thing that made Scott so valuable, and we've seen this over the years at Michigan State, when you got a big, and he was a 4 for Maryland last year, but when you got a big that you feel pretty good about switching 1 through 5.
Right.
You can just switch with impunity. That's a huge, huge card to be able to play on that end. And they are not going to have that this year. It's just that simple. And then you add in Queen will not be able to play the 5 the same way defensively that Reese did. Reese will, in my opinion, is probably not quite as versatile as Scott was. And then you got an open question as to whether your new guards are as good as the guys they were replacing on that end. They're going to add shooting most likely, you know that. But how does the totality come out? So all fair questions. Obviously I gotta make choices here. So I'm figuring by virtue of where I put them that I think they will be a tournament team, but it's not clear cut to me, at least.
All right. Well, it's nice that the Terrapin fans can rest easily knowing that you've guaranteed that they're going to be in the NCAA tournament next year. So yeah. All right. So until next time, when we go over the number 8 team, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.